HQ here. This is regarding the attack on the press that Donald Trump said he was going to do. He said currently he's following through on the threats of legal action against the media, and I don't think we can afford to have that happen, right? Okay, according to reports, ABC agreed to pay 15 million to settle defamation lawsuit brought on by Trump. His legal team filed a suit against Ann Seltzer, the lady from the Des Moines, Iowa Register, for a poll that showed that Kamala was leading in the polls. He calls the suit's poll election interfering fiction. Right now, this is like an attack on the media, and we cannot afford for this to continue to go on. Okay, they filed a lawsuit against this Ann Seltzer, the Des Moines, Iowa. 3 day. This was a poll that was released, if you remember, before the election. 3 days before the election, this poll by this Ann Seltzer was released from the Des Moines, Iowa Register, and the poll was showing that President Kamala Harris was leading by 3 points, right? But Trump won that state by 17. So his lawsuit is being called the post election interfering fiction lawsuit, right? Basically, it's a lawsuit against the news media. He said he was going to do it, so now he's starting to do it. Okay. And the whole point is this: it's interesting that he can do so, but we have something in place called a lawsuit in place called Sullivan versus the New York Times, right? I think it was Sullivan versus the New York Times. Now, in 1960, I guess the termination or the settlement of it came down in 1964. The New York Times. This is how it happened, where this is the background in which you cannot sue a newspaper. You cannot sue a public figure when they make a statement about you. Trump is trying to sue ABC News, CBS, all of them because they write what they write about him, right? So he don't like it. But there's something in place that stops him. He cannot sue these people because of a particular thing. So it's called Sullivan versus New York Times. So in 1960, the New York Times ran a full page advertisement paid for by the civil rights activists, right? The ad openly criticized the police department in the city of Montgomery, okay, Alabama, for its treatment of civil rights protesters. Most of the descriptions in the ad were accurate, but some of the statements were false in this advertisement, right? The police commissioner, Mr. Sullivan, took offense to the ad and sued the New York Times in the Alabama court. He argued that the ad had damaged his reputation and he had been libeled. Right. The Alabama court ruled in favor of this Sullivan character, in favor of Sullivan, saying that the newspaper ad falsely represented the police department and Sullivan. Then he went on. Then I think the New York Times went on and tried and appealed it, right? So he lost the appeal in the Supreme Court of Alabama, and the New York Times took the case on to the United States Supreme Court. I think the New York Times lost the New York Times lost the appeal because they tried to appeal. Sullivan sued New York Times. The New York Times tried to appeal and they lost it in the Alabama Supreme Court. Then the New York Times took it to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court of the United States argued, New York Times argued that the ad was not meant to hurt Sullivan's reputation, and it was protected under the First Amendment of speech, right? So the United States Supreme Court unanimously 9-0, ruled in favor of the newspaper. The court said the right to publish all statements is protected under the First Amendment right? The court also said in order to prove it was libel, In order to prove that New York Times was liable for what they said about Sullivan in the article, Sullivan had to prove or show what was said against them that was actual malice. That is, with the knowledge that it was false or was reckless, disregarding the truth. Now, that's the background of why a public politician cannot sue a newspaper because of this Sullivan versus New York Times. The decision came down in 1964. Now, fast forward to today. There was a mogul, a rich guy named Wynn. He got accused of what was it? He got accused of sex SA. So he asked the Supreme Court to hear an appeal, which would give him a right to sue uh, the newspaper and then win. See, the court established a strict limit on defamation claims by public figures during the 1964 the 1964 ruling in New York against New York versus the Sullivan case, right? So that has been the rule of the land for the past since the past 60 years, right? You cannot sue a newspaper for what they say unless you prove malice, right? Unless you prove malice. Now, this dude, I don't know what he owns. He's his I don't know what he owns. His last name is Wynn, Wynn. He is suing, or he has taken the lawsuit to the Supreme Court uh, so that he can sue someone for calling him a SAer. Uh, and they did it in, I think it was 2019 or something like that, 2018 or something. The lower courts, the court found that he failed to show that the lower courts, that the person acted in malice when they accused him of being an SA person. So the Supreme Court in New York Times set the standard. In order for you to win a libel suit against anyone, a public figure must demonstrate the offending person who wrote the article against them that the article was made in malice, that the article was personal, meaning with knowledge it was false and reckless for the reporter to do it. Now, fast forward to Trump. Okay. Trump, you notice that Trump keeps suing these people. He keeps trying to sue the New York Times, CNN, and all of these things. Now, what we need to be afraid of is this. Because of this precedent, because this has stood for 60 years, this 1964 was when the ruling came down. It was called New York against Sullivan, New York versus Sullivan. That ruling has lasted for 60 years. Now, Trump and this mogul guy, this Wynn guy, Wynn, are challenging the Sullivan versus New York decision. Now, if they win, to overturn it, that would mean that anybody can be sued for anything. That would hamstring, that would hold the reporters from reporting the truth. If they wanted to report the truth about Trump, they would be scared to report the truth about Trump because they would be subject to a lawsuit. No, it's not a reach. It's not a reach. People are saying it's a reach. It's not a reach. They are attacking free speech as we speak. Okay? Changing that New York Times versus Sullivan could significantly harm the ability for a reporter or the press to report on a public figure and could lead to effects of public discourse by making it much harder for public officials or making it much harder for the press to report the truth. Okay, public officials can sue you for defamation, potentially stop you from doing critical reporting. Okay, and it would limit the discussion that you could possibly have about a public figure. It can It can return to the times where criticism about your public official, okay, would be stifled by threats of a lawsuit undermining the First Amendment of free speech. That's the whole thing. It's an attack on free speech. You cannot allow that particular ruling, the 1964 ruling called New York Times versus Sullivan. You cannot allow that to be overturned. Otherwise, these things will harming Sullivan, and that will have consequences that we do not want to have. It will increase censorship. You'll be afraid to talk. You'll be afraid to say anything. Journalists might be less likely to report on controversial subjects or critical information about public figures due to the fear of lawsuits. Even if the information is correct and true, it could be leading to a less informed public. We already got people believing everything Trump say. We already got people believing the lies, the whole nine. You believe in everything the person says. The person lies through their teeth, but that's another story. It also becomes easier for for you to sue the press. It could be discouraging criticism of a candidate, just like they're doing now. Okay, just like they're doing now. Nobody wants to say anything. Everybody is letting things go. Everybody is letting Elon Musk do what he wants to do what they can say anything in the press. Nobody got any pushback. They can say the most wildest things and nobody has any pushback. Okay, and my whole point is most reporters don't say stuff that ain't particularly true to a certain extent. I get it. People, you don't believe the press. I don't. I take when you want to understand what the press is doing and the truth out of the press, you need to look at different parts of the press. You need to look at 3, 4, 5, 6 different sources. You need to look at those sources and compare what they say. If all of them have a similar thread, if all of these 10 sources of reporting have a similar thread, more than likely that similar thread is the truth. Okay? The whole point is changing that 64 decision, that Sullivan versus New York decision, could encourage frivolous lawsuits filed primarily to intimidate, to bankrupt critics, silence dissent, even if those claims are baseless. Trump just won a lawsuit against ABC News because George Stephanopoulos said one or two different words that were different, or he swapped the word. He said something, and they settled with Trump, not because Trump was right. They settled with Trump because they didn't want to go, because he was going to drag it into the courts. Okay, he was going to drag it out into the courts. Another reason why you don't want to overturn this New York versus Sullivan, it's you have to prove the actual malice. You have to prove the actual malice. Okay, standards set by the by that New York lawsuit. It's considered the cornerstone of a free press. I can report whatever I want to report, but it cannot have malice. If you feel like I lied about you, then you have to prove that I lied about you, and you have to prove that I had malice. Okay? Now, I can stand here right now and say Trump has lied. I can say that with complete confidence that I know he has lied. So he cannot sue me and say, I'm suing her, she lied. No. So he can't say that because I have proof that he lied. Okay? And I'm not doing it out of malice. I'm doing it as a matter of fact. Okay? But what if this 1964 turns over, and then it gets overturned? This 64 ruling of Sullivan versus New York Times gets overturned, then anyone can be sued. Anyone can say anything that they want, but they're going to be sued, okay? Because there's no gate, no guardrail for a person, because you don't know whether I'm saying it out of malice or not. That standard of malice, actual malice, will not be there. So this is why it's very important for that ruling to stand. It's a 1964 ruling that says you have to prove malice when someone reports things to you, report things against you, okay? Someone wrote in 1960, someone wrote an article about a man named Sullivan, a policeman named Sullivan. Sullivan didn't like what was said, so he sued the New York Times. The New York Times appealed, and they lost again. So Sullivan won 2 times in the lower courts. Then New York went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld New York Times reasons for writing the article that they did against Sullivan. And that law, which came down in 1964, called Sullivan versus New York Times, it has held since 1964. Now, Trump is trying to overturn that ruling of that 1964 ruling, so he will be able to sue people who say things against him. Don't y'all find that strange that a president would be going after the press, suing the press for things that they said that they're saying that are true? But he doesn't like what you say, so he wants to sue them. He wants to change that. He wants to be able to sue these people however he wants to sue these people. But this ruling, this Sullivan versus New York 1964, this limits what you can do to a newspaper as long as you don't prove malice. You cannot prove malice. It cannot stand in the court of law. So I'm saying keep an eye out on what Trump and his cronies and his friends are trying to do to the First Amendment. This is the First Amendment that they are attacking. The First Amendment is free speech. So why would you try to overturn something that supports free speech in this country unless you want to undermine the rule of law in this country, unless you want to undermine the Constitution of this country? People don't see it. Some people do, some people don't. But we can see exactly the playbook that's going on here. Fine and dandy. You want to do that. But this is how it starts. Y'all not seeing it. People are not seeing it. But one of the people who are standing back and watching are saying, why would you want to overturn? Why would you want to mess with the First Amendment right to free speech? And a lot of people don't even understand that. It's called the First Amendment, free speech, which means the press should be able to report whatever they want to report against whoever they want to report it to, as long as it doesn't contain malice. Okay, it has nothing to do with accountability. It has nothing to do with that. They have a right to say whatever they want to say, as long as it's true and as long as it's not reported malice. Okay, that's what protects them, as long as they're not reporting it out of malice. And no reporter is reporting anything out of malice. I've only seen a couple of people report stuff out of malice, and that's been on the right-hand side. But as far as we know, we've heard the truth from most people. Like I said, do your due diligence. Most of y'all don't read. Most of y'all don't read anything. I read a whole bunch of stuff, and I try to find out the truth. You do research on, go and look at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different outlets of news, and then compare them. Oh, they said this, they said that, and if it's a common theme within all 7 of those things, 9 times out of 10, you could possibly believe that common thing that comes out of it. You cannot go look at the stuff that you like. You have to go look at the stuff that I like. If you don't believe me, and I'm a liberal person, and you don't believe what I'm saying, you need to look at my stuff, And then you need to look at your stuff. And then you need to make a comparison between those. Is your stuff saying the stuff my stuff is saying? Are they saying similar things? Or what are they saying? But you cannot stand on the sideline. This is too important. You cannot stand on the sideline and say, oh, what Trump is saying is right. Because most of y'all don't agree with everything that he says. But yet and still, you went along with this person. Now we have foreign people in our government. We got people running down our money that is not supposed to be in charge of our money. And now we're on the precipice of this country changing, not for the better. Not for the better. Okay? And tearing it all down makes no sense. But I'm saying, when you start attacking the First Amendment rights for free speech, when you start attacking Sullivan versus New York Times, a 1964 precedent, we have a problem. No, it's not for the better. Certain things are not for the better. Okay? Certain things are not for the better. Attacking free speech is not for the better. People get beheaded in other countries because they cannot speak of the atrocities and the damage that their government has done. My whole point is there's damage that it will be done if this is overturned, because then we won't be able to speak as freely as we want to speak. And people have to be able to speak as freely as they need to speak, because other people don't necessarily, there's many of us out here who do not support the things that our president is doing. There's many of us out here. Most of us didn't vote. Most of us didn't vote, okay? Because of whatever. Most of us didn't vote. Now you're going to reap what you sow. Now you're going to reap what you sow, okay? But it is what it is. Please check out Sullivan versus New York Times. That was a ruling that upheld the First Amendment free speech, and Trump is trying to tear that down. And I don't appreciate a president trying to undermine our Constitution or anything else like that. Okay, I don't believe that is any direction that we should be going. And there's plenty of people who think that same way. Okay, there's plenty of things. But we will speak on more of this, and we will have another session of our political thoughts and processes. But this one was about the free speech and the decision of Sullivan versus New York Times. And I thank you for being there. Please hit the like button, guys. Please hit the like button. It'd be amazing. You can hit the like button.